We'll wait just a few more seconds to make sure that everyone can log in. Just a second. Okay, we'll start. Okay, so good evening. My name is Noam and I'm from Moreshet. I am pleased to welcome you to the third event of the second series of webinars, Polish Talk Mondays with JHI, Jewish Historical Institute. This special program is a cooperation between Moreshet, Mordechai Anielewicz Memorial Education and Research Center, the Polish Institute in Tel Aviv, the Association of Israeli Guides and Leaders of Delegation to Poland and Commemoration of the Holocaust, and the Emanuel Ringelblum Jewish Historical Institute. This evening, we are hosting Dr. Agnieszka Żółkiewska, who will speak about artistic life of the Warsaw Ghetto. We will have 45 minutes of presentation and then approximately 15 minutes for questions. When we get to the question session, please submit your questions via the Q&A on your screen and not via the chat. Dr. Agnieszka Żółkiewska is a historian, translator from Yiddish and research fellow of the Emanuel Ringelblum Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, Gierowski and Shmeruk Prize laureate. Her publication include translations and commentary of Yiddish poetry from the Shoah, Słowa pośród nocy, poetyckie dokumenty Holokaustu, from 2012, and a study of the post-war Jewish intelligentsia in Poland. Zerwana przeszłość powojenne środowisku inteligencji wyborczej, from 2017. She is also one of the translators and editors of the complete edition of the Emanuel Ringelblum archive in Polish. Since 2018, she has taken part in a long-term scientific project which aims to create the Warsaw Ghetto Encyclopedia online. Dr. Żółkiewska, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Shalom, shalom aleichem, dobry wieczór. I would like to thank the Moreshet Center and the Polish Institute in Tel Aviv for invitation. I'm really happy to be with you today and to share with you my knowledge, my discoveries. And we can start with my presentation. Okay, just a moment, some technical, oops, something wrong.
Just press the button on the presentation that enlarge the screen, the one that looks like a cup.
Just a moment, once again.
Okay.
Okay. And now. Is it okay? Okay, now. I'm sorry. It's something still new for me. And as announced, my lecture today will be entirely devoted to the fate of artists from the Warsaw Ghetto, and more precisely, to the fate of Jewish painters and sculptors. I will talk about their everyday life and artistic work, as well as how they fought for survival during the first liquidation action and how they lost that fight. As I am presenting new and unknown facts that I would like to publish, I ask everyone not to copy my lecture. The rights to some of photos and images shown by me are reserved and you can't use it by the permission of a Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. Despite the passage of time, we still know little about fine artists from the Warsaw Ghetto, and information about them is scattered in various sources and archives. Some new, still unused documents are in the underground archive of the Warsaw Ghetto, known as the Ringelblum archive. A big problem for reconstructing the history of artistic life in the Warsaw Ghetto is the lack of eyewitness accounts. From the group of about 50 painters and sculptors who were in the Warsaw Ghetto, probably 4 survived the Holocaust. Of this group, only Samuel Puterman left a testimony. The testimony is a diary that was written by him in the ghetto, but I suspect that it was written later, just after the war. Despite the enormous cognitive value, this source of knowledge is quite selective and limited, just as human memory is limited and selective. The memories of the few surviving witnesses from outside this milieu who had close contacts with fine artists in the ghetto have also been preserved. I am thinking in particular of the writer and psychologist Rachel Auerbach and the director and actor of Yiddish theater, Jonas Turkow. After the war, a Jewish art historian, Józef Sandel, who survived in the Soviet Union, gathered a lot of information about the artists and their fate during the Holocaust. It is not his only contribution. Sandel also managed to find many lost or stolen Jewish works of art. They are currently in the collection of the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. It was a small introduction to my lecture, and now I will turn to the main topic of my talk. Before the war, the Jewish art community in Poland numbered over 300 people, about 80% whom were painters. All artists were associated in various organizations and artistic groups, including Polish Jewish. When World War II broke out, some artists were in Kazimierz Dolny by the Vistula River. It used to be a very fashionable holiday destination among the Jewish artistic elite. Every year, Jewish painters spent a lot of time there, painting the city and its inhabitants, what you can see on this slide. During the last summer, before the outbreak of the war, Kazimierz Dolny hosted an opening event of 3 of the most outstanding Jewish painters, Herz Cyna, Henryk Rabinowicz, and Felix Friedman. Fortunately, they managed to evacuate before the entry of the German army. They returned to Warsaw despite the potential danger they faced. They could not have foreseen that while remaining in the city, they would sign a death warrant for themselves. Many of their colleagues professionally involved in art fled from Warsaw in the first days of September 1939 towards the eastern border of Poland, looking for a safe haven in the Soviet Union. One of many such artists was the Warsaw-born sculptor Nathan Rapoport, the creator of the monument of the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. He survived the war in Tashkent. Other painters and sculptors fleeing Warsaw stayed in Białystok, occupied by the Soviets. When the German-Russian war broke out 2 years later, some returned to Warsaw, where they shared the tragic fate of the inhabitants of the Warsaw Ghetto, while others, like the famous painter Stanisława Centner-Szwerowa, were imprisoned in the Białystok Ghetto and then murdered. There were cases of artists migrating from other ghettos in the Eastern territories. In the autumn of 1941, the painter Benjamin Rosenfeld, author of the art preserved in the Ringelblum archive, came to the Warsaw Ghetto from the Lviv Ghetto. Other more famous painters who made their way from Lviv to Warsaw, such as the famous cartoonist Jacob Bickles, never went to the Warsaw Ghetto. They were hiding on the Aryan side of the walls, believing that they would manage to survive under the changed identity from the end of the war. Jacob Bickles did not succeed. The German occupation meant serious changes and limitations for the artists who stayed in Warsaw. They had no employment or livelihood. The outstanding painter, Adam Herschaft, lost almost all his artistic achievements during the siege of Warsaw in September 1939. His atelier on Prosta Street and numerous paintings there were burned. Jewish artists, just like other Jews, were exposed to various persecutions and repressions by the Germans. Particularly troublesome at that time were the roundups that were the random street abductions used by Germans to catch Jews to forced labor. It is worth recalling here the story of a painter, Max Anielewicz, who fell victim to one of such roundups. His story is quite unusual and paradoxical. At the beginning of the occupation, he was arrested in the street and sent to forced labor with German tanks. When the Germans found out that he was a painter, he received many orders for portraits from German soldiers, even high-ranking ones. He was paid 150 zlotys per painted picture. Believe me, it was pretty much at that time. After the establishment of the closed Jewish district in Warsaw in November 1940, the situation of the artists deteriorated significantly. Only a few could make a living by creating artistic works commissioned by private person or ghetto institutions. For example, the painter Hersch Zinna earned his living by doing graphic work commissioned by the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, for which he was paid in the form of a cash allowance. It should be assumed that some artists, just like before the war, combined their artistic and paid work, earning their living by painting portraits. It is known that many portraits were made in the ghetto, especially by Roman Kramstik. He painted portraits of his friends and neighbors, but also wealthy people, including high-ranking ghetto officials. He created, among others, a few portraits of the president of the Judenrat, Adam Czerniaków. Some artists have tried to earn a living by selling their paintings. Their wives helped them, as exemplified by Mrs. H. We do not know the name or surname of this woman, but there are many indications that she was the wife of painter Adam Herschaft. According to her story, described in the Ringelblum archive, she became her husband's manager and art dealer because he was completely helpless in life and could not adapt to the conditions in the ghetto. Conducting his business, Mrs. H showed exceptional ingenuity. First, she organized an exhibition of her husband's pre-war paintings and then a lottery of pictures painted by him in the ghetto. She sold tickets to the exhibition to her friends and offered those who were more affluent to buy paintings. Artists were also looking for other ways to earn bread. They even tried their hand at catering industry. In the spring of 1941, a group of them established their own open-air cafe known as the Artist Garden. It was located in the stonemason's workshop of the sculptor Abraham Ostrzega on Milna Street. It was one of the few green areas in the ghetto, located at the back of the Evangelical Reformed Church. In this photo, we can see the facade of this church. The next photo shows the same building on the other side from the back. According to sources, the Artist's Garden was located in this place. Only individual artists managed to find a permanent job in the ghetto. As a rule, it did not correspond to their artistic qualifications. Let me give you a few examples. The painter I have already mentioned, Adam Herschaft, worked as a clerk in the Judenrat office. His younger colleagues, painters Samuel Putterman and Josef Menes, were functionaries of a Jewish order service, that is, the Jewish police. Working in this institution, disliked by the inhabitants of the ghetto, provided a modest salary, but most of all, it protected against deportation to a forced labor camp. Josef Menes combined the work of a policeman with that of an artist. He also earned a living by painting portraits. I suspect that Menes or Putterman could also have done graphic work commissioned by the Jewish police. Perhaps one of them is the author of this plan showing the division of the Warsaw Ghetto into 6 work areas of a Jewish order service. This plan is a composition made in the collage technique. It was created from 2 photos. One shows a plan of the ghetto, the other a Jewish policeman who was in charge of road traffic. Perhaps Putterman or Menes could also have been the author of a caricature of a Jewish policeman on the front page of a satirical work about the Jewish police. The work was reproduced on a duplicating machine in a dozen or so copies in 1942. One of the copies has been preserved in the Ringelblum archive. Some artists found employment in the theater. The painter Alexander Lieberman, who worked as a stage designer before the war, collaborated with all theaters operating in the ghetto. In this slide, you can see a design for art decorations made by this artist for one of the theaters in the ghetto. A couple of graphic artists who had collaborated before the war, Lucia Wolcher-Schweigerowa and Samuel Nussenbaum, ran their own theatrical activity. Together, they founded the first children's theater group in the ghetto called the Blue Cheeks. On January 11th, 1941, he performed at El Dorado Theater with a spectacle, Colorful Noise, based on Julian Tuwim's poetry. Painter Gela Sechstein also worked with children in the ghetto. Together with her husband, Israel Lichtenstein, they ran a school by the children's kitchen at Novolipki Street. She worked there first as a tutor, then as a drawing teacher. Together with her students, she prepared an exhibition of their works and drawings. She also made decorations and costumes for children's performances. For her work with children, she received a financial award from the chairman of the Warsaw Judenrat, Adam Czerniaków. A difficult to estimate number of artists, probably not many, were involved in the underground movement in the ghetto. They collaborated on the publishing of the underground press and books of various Jewish underground organizations. Most often, they designed vignettes, covers, and illustrations. According to the rules of the underground, their works were printed anonymously. It should be assumed that they were mostly amateurs, very young artists, perhaps even teenagers, who did not manage to develop their own artistic style. This can be seen in the examples of many drawings illustrating the ghetto underground press, which are made very clumsily with the still unprocessed hand of a beginning artist. Other illustrations, on the other hand, are already characterized by a certain artistic maturity, revealing their promising talent. An example may be this drawing from the conspirational magazine, Iton Hatnua. It shows a human skeleton symbolizing death walking among German cannons and helmets. Professional graphic designers and painters likewise collaborated with underground publishing houses. It is certain that one of them was Solomon Nussenbaum, who I already mentioned. Commissioned by the Zionist organization Dror, he designed the cover of the conspirational edition of the drama by Itzhak Katzenelson, published in 1941. The underground activity allowed artists to combine artistic and paid work. This was not, however, a rule, given the ideological nature of this work. Such an exception, as it seems, was Benjamin Rosenfeld, who started cooperation with the underground group Onek Shabbat. At the group's request, he created a series of drawings about life in the ghetto and outside its walls. At the beginning of March 1942, he handed them over to the organization's treasurer, Menachem Kohn, for which he received a fee of 100 zlotys. I will talk about his drawings in the further course of my lecture. The works performed by the artists in the ghetto were of an occasional or seasonal nature. Most, however, were unemployed and had no means of subsistence. These people could count on the support of 8 organizations in the ghetto. The care of these institutions for the artists took various forms. Most often it boiled down to providing them with a free or cheap meal, 1 plate of soup a day. They were also assigned for food parcels, clothes, and money. However, it should be remembered that permanent cash benefits were usually granted to people with well-known names and specific artistic achievements. Less famous artists were deprived of this privilege. An example is the very young painter, Abraham Michałowicz. You can see him on this slide, who made his debut a few years before the war, while his famous colleagues, fine artists, received grants and meals. He was starving. A special form of help provided to artists were poster contests promoting various charity campaigns. They were organized by various ghetto organizations. One of such competitions for a propaganda poster of a winter aid campaign was held at the turn of 1941 and 1942. Some very famous artists joined him. High prizes were awarded for participation in the competition. The first prize of 300 zlotys was awarded to Benjamin Rosenfeld. And on the slide, you can see the poster awarded in the competition announced as part of a children's fund in 1941. And a few more examples. These are the designs of propaganda posters for the same initiative, Children's Month, made by young artist Witold Levinson. The most outstanding artists were under the special care of Adam Czerniaków. He supported them financially in various ways, including by buying their paintings and sculptures. With some of the purchased works of art, he decorated his office in the main building of the Judenrat at Grzybowska Street. One of the drawings purchased by Czerniaków is clearly visible in these photos from a German propaganda film shot in the Warsaw Ghetto in May 1942. This painting has survived and it is in the collection of the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. Its author is Max Eliowicz. Adam Czerniaków probably also commissioned the performance of this album, which has been preserved in the Ringelblum archive. It was not known for a long time who was the author of this album, for whom it was created, and what its purpose was. I am the one who managed to discover the author's identity and reconstruct the history of this creation. I found out that it was made by the novice painter Teofila Langnas, later the wife of a literary critic, Reich Ranicki. According to his memories, Czerniaków commissioned her with various graphic works, among others, albums. As I said, it is highly probable that the album found in the Ringelblum archive was also made by Teofila Langnas at the request of Adam Czerniaków. It is indicated by the first page on which the name of a function performed by Adam Czerniaków appears in two languages, Polish and German. The first page also has a sign stylized as a royal coat of arms. There is no time to go into more detail about the contents of this album. It is in many ways unique when compared to albums made in other ghettos. Many such albums were especially created in the Łódź ghetto, as can be seen on the slide. What sets it apart from other albums, it is its satirical nature. The drawings included there in a mocking and grotesque way show the realities of life in the ghetto, especially the inefficiency of the Judenrat and its individual departments. And now it's time to answer the question, what was the artistic activity like in the Warsaw Ghetto? In this case, it is difficult to talk about artistic activity in the sense that was in force before the war. It was almost always connected with the struggle to stay alive. The harsh conditions in the ghetto generally made it difficult to practice art. The burning problem of all artists was the lack of basic painting tools, such as paints, brushes, and so on. Against all odds and countless obstacles, some artists tried to continue their artistic activity. This is evidenced by their works, but both paintings and drawings, which they painted in the ghetto. I would now like to show you those that have survived and are now kept in the collections of the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. The works of art that I will show in a moment were created out of the need to document the tragic reality of the ghetto. The authors, painters felt this need very deeply. Therefore, the images of the ghetto they painted should be treated as a visual documents of the Holocaust. One of the painters who left such a visual testimony was Roman Kramstik. His models were people most affected by hunger and poverty, adults and children begging in the streets of the ghetto. He made, among others, a work entitled The Family in the Ghetto. You can see it on the slide. This drawing probably shows Nuchem Leibkorn and his 4 children. They were forcibly displaced by the Germans from Skierniewice, a small town near Warsaw, and deported also forcibly to the Warsaw Ghetto, where they lived on the street and probably died of starvation there. Drawing with a similar subject, showing people and scenes from the streets of the Warsaw Ghetto, were also painted by Witold Levinson, a painter much younger than Kramstik. They usually show homeless children. They are children with the faces of young old men or the living dead. There is no doubt that the drawings by Benjamin Rosenfeld, which I have already mentioned, also arose from the need to document the tragic reality of the ghetto. According to the commentary attached to these drawings, probably prepared by the artist himself, they were created between December 14th and 16th, 1941. The subject matter focuses on the basic experiences of a majority of the inhabitants of a Jewish gated district: hunger, disease, death, and violence. Each of the authors of the drawings I showed used a different technique. It is worth saying a few words on this subject because it is directly related to a much deeper issue, which was the ways of presenting the Holocaust in works of art from that period. Please note that Levinson's drawings are made very minimalist, using a few means as possible, pencil on sheets of paper. This gives us the impression that they are very expressive. Levinson used the simplest technique, which may have been due to the fact that it was very difficult to obtain materials for painting in the ghetto. Thanks to this minimalism, it achieved its maximum expression, deeply moving simplicity. Roman Kramstik also used very sparing means. It is interesting that he painted on paper and cardboard using only one tool, the sanguine, a reddish brown crayon. For him, everything in the ghetto was reddish brown, that is the color of blood. It is believed that he learned this technique by imitating post-impressionist painters. For me personally, there is something disturbing and sinister in this bloody color of Kramstik's paintings, something deeply apocalyptic, as if the artist sensed the tragic fate that befell him and other people in the ghetto. Benjamin Rosenfeld made his drawings differently than Kramstik and Levinson, namely using a mixed technique with ink, charcoal, and crayon. They are dominated by black, gray, and yellow. The range of colors selected by Rosenfeld is an extremely suggestive way reflects the color of the ghetto. It's depressing monochrome. The preserved accounts and memories compare the ghetto to Dante's hell, where it was dark, there was no greenery, and people wore rags. Not all artists painted the ghetto with a need to document reality in mind. Such an example is Gela Seckstein. If we carefully look at her drawings preserved in the Ringelblum archive, we can conclude that the painter did not have the ambition to record the terrifying scenes taking place in the streets of a ghetto, as did Kramstik, Rosenfeld, and Levinson. She painted her immediate surroundings, mainly children from the school where she worked. Perhaps she she avoided painting the ghetto, as didn't have the strength. As an artist, she was unable to confront the tragic reality because it was a source of trauma for her. According to Rachel Auerbach's memoirs, other artists, especially the more famous ones, refused to paint the ghetto, claiming that only in the future, that is after the war, would they be able to deal with this difficult topic. Unfortunately, we do not know for sure whether this was the case and whether they were not painting pictures of the ghetto. Our ignorance comes from the fact that many works of art from the Warsaw Ghetto have been lost, destroyed, or stolen. Out of over 140 works by Kramstik, only a dozen survived. Pictures by the extremely talented teenager Zbigniew Schenberg, a student of the technical drawing courses organized by the Judenrat in 1941, are also missing. We will never know what the paintings of another very young painter and poet, Tadeus Bernstein, who was born in Tomaszów Mazowiecki, presented. During World War II, he stayed in the closed Jewish district in Warsaw. He painted a few pictures of a ghetto, which according to an eyewitness were gray, muddy, terrible. These images were destroyed during the first liquidation of the ghetto in the summer of 1942. Bernstein was murdered in Treblinka. He was 17 at the time. Other painters and sculptors from the Warsaw Ghetto also died in the gas chambers of Treblinka. Before they were put to death, however, they tried to save themselves at all costs. The shop on Milna Street became a symbol of their struggle for life. The artists founded it during the first liquidation of the ghetto in July 1942, wanting to protect themselves and their families from deportation to Treblinka. In the language of the ghetto, a shop is a workshop or factory. The artist shop on Milna Street produced whetstones and bayonet sharpening powder for the German company Karl-Heinz Müller. It was located on the premises of Abraham Ostrzega's stone masonry that is in exactly the same place where a group of them previously ran a cafe. The workshop employed not only artists, but also actors. On August 25, 1942, according to Jonas Turkov, at the beginning of September, the workshop was liquidated and all the painters and actors working there were taken to Umschlagplatz, from where they were deported to Treblinka. Out of all this group, only Jonas Turkov and his wife, Diana Blumenfeld, survived. The fate of the outstanding painter, Felix Friedman, was completely different. During the first liquidation action, he was not in the Warsaw Ghetto. He stayed in a sanatorium in Otwock, where he was treated for tuberculosis. When the liquidation operation began in the local ghetto, he returned to the Warsaw Ghetto. Due to his poor health, he was placed in the hospital on Gęsia Street and stayed there until the next liquidation action in January 1943. He avoided deportation to Treblinka thanks to a nurse who gave him a lethal dose of morphine. Benjamin Rosenfeld, the author of drawings from the Ringelblum archive, survived the longest. He was hiding on the Aryan side of Warsaw. In August 1944, he took part in the Warsaw Uprising as a soldier in the underground Polish organization, People's Army. He died in combat on September 10, 1944. The date of his death can be considered symbolic and heroic and to the history of artists from the Warsaw Ghetto. Thank you. And now I invite you to ask me questions.
Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. So we'll welcome you to ask questions with the Q&A. And maybe I'll start with a small question. As far as I know, usually mothers that take care of children didn't write diaries. What about making art?
Artists I think that it's very difficult to write memories when you are the artist. It's typical for artists that they don't like to write memories, but maybe maybe there are some testimonies in different archives written by artists who were in the Warsaw Ghetto, but I have no idea about it. As far as I remember your question, because
can you characterize most of the artists? Men, women, young adults.
Yeah. It's very. It was very complicated group. Consisted of old, very talented and known artists, and you can also say about new generation of artists in the Warsaw Ghetto. As I said during my lecture, there were also young artists in the ghetto, the teenagers, the amateurs. Among them was, for example, Mary Berg. She was also artist talented, and she was awarded with some prize, I don't remember, by Chernyakov. So I think not so many women belong to this group because it was typical for this group. As the same we can see in group of writers. The majority of writers was men, not women. That's why this group, of course, was mixed, and I feel it would. But I know about many. Not about. I don't know many female artists. Unfortunately, I mentioned Łucja, Welcher, Schweigerova. I should mention also Regina Mundlak. She was very old at that time. There are a few more artists, female artists from the Warsaw Ghetto.
We have a few questions. Tamar Alpern asks, are the drawings we saw on the screen available to be seen somewhere?
Yeah. Every picture, every painting, you can see on the website of the Jewish Historical Institute. We have special part of our website called the main Judaistic library, and you can find it. Find those pictures and drawings. They are accessible, and you can see much more than I showed today. Presented today.
There is another question regarding the biographies of those artists. So it's the same as the pictures themselves? Also available in the website of
No. It's part of biographies are available in different places, not on our website. but I am preparing biographies of all artists from the Warsaw Ghetto because I am a member of the team preparing the Warsaw Ghetto Encyclopedia online, and you will read the encyclopedia in 2 years. It will be possible when we start our when we open our encyclopedia online in 2 years.
Okay. Neta Avidar asked, do you know about the painter Simchat Rachter?
Yeah. It's he belonged to the generation of known and talented artists, and we made recently an exhibition with his works. We also published a nice book devoted to this artist, and you can buy it in our online shop. He was very close in the ghetto to a group of old painters, such as Friedman, Rabinovich, Ostrega. He cooperated with them in the ghetto. And as far as I know, he was employed by Chernyakov in order to make renovation of the main hall of the Judenrat building. And he painted together with a few artists a huge picture of Hiob, Job, a biblical Hiob. And he was killed in Treblinka. He was also a member of artist shop at Milna Street.
Olga Moskalenko asks, how did the artists manage to save their drawings in which the theme of Holocaust is visible?
Could you repeat?
How could they save their drawings? How it was possible? I guess the question is they gave it to the Oneg Shabbat archive, no?
Yeah. No. There are different stories connected with those drawings and paintings. For example, Levinson's drawings were delivered to my institute 20 years after the war. Somebody gave us those drawings with some commentary, but we don't know how they survived. Many drawings, not so many, were preserved in the Ringelblum archive. Most of them were painted by Gala Sechstein. The drawing by Kramstik came to my institute from Argentina. It was a gift of Polish embassy in Argentina. As you can see, there are different stories connected with surviving of these paintings. I think in many cases we have to do with some kind of miracle.
Netta Goldman asked, do we know anything about Benjamin Rosenfeld? Did he have a family?
Yes. I am a person who discovered this painter once again, because he was unknown. He was known only as B. Rosenfeld. We didn't know his name. And I found some article written by Sandel, Josef Sandel, in 1953, and he mentioned Rosenfeld, and he told his story that he was an architecture and a painter, and he was hiding on the Aryan side. And then I made a research. I tried to find more details concerning regarding his biography, and I found very interesting information concerning his life in the ghetto and his life on the Aryan side, his conspiracy activity. He was still active as a painter on the Aryan side. He made posters for recalling to Warsaw Uprising. Maybe among many anonymous posters kept in Museum of Warsaw Uprising, you can find Rosenfeld's posters. We don't know. And finally, I found his family coming from Lviv, but now his family is in Israel, because his younger brother survived on Aryan side, and one of his numerous brothers, very talented ones, survived in the Soviet Union, and they both moved to Israel, and they had families. And two relatives of Rosenfeld are still alive. One of them is son of his brother, younger brother, and his name is Benjamin. And one of his relatives is a famous Israeli musician. Unfortunately, he changed name and I don't remember. It's very popular, but he belongs to the older generation of musicians in Israel. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name. But you can find more information about Rosenfeld in my article on a website of the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. And you can find the name of his relatives in Israel. It was my huge discovery after so many years that I discovered that B. Rosenfeld was Benjamin Rosenfeld.
Interesting. Uri Peled asks, what about the one who is called the last painter of the ghetto, Gele Zachstein? Is that a legend or true?
As far as I know, she survived till the ghetto uprising. He was killed in bunker, in the shelter, in the basement of the same building where she taught when she was a teacher, drawing teacher, and I think she wasn't the last painter of the Warsaw Ghetto, but she died in the Warsaw Ghetto, and maybe that's why we can call her the last painter of the Warsaw Ghetto, because Rosenfeld died on the Aryan side. Some of survived painters like Putterman survived, but they were in different concentration camps. I think Gela Zachstein deserves to be called the last painter of the Warsaw Ghetto, because she died in the Warsaw Ghetto. It's difficult to solve, to answer this question.
Shmuel Yerushalmi asked, it is Jewish artists in the Warsaw Ghetto in the works tried in any form to express protest, I guess, and anti-Nazi emotions.
What is surprising in those pictures and drawings, we don't see Germans at all, but with some exceptions. I presented you some drawings from the underground press, and you can see there some examples of protest against Nazism, against Germans. It was possible only, I think, in underground publications, but we don't know exactly what more was created. Maybe there were some posters or paintings which we can treat as a protest against Nazism. We don't know, unfortunately. But I found in different archives some interesting caricatures, cartoons concerning made during the Holocaust in the ghettos, and they have something like they express something like protest.
My last two last questions. The Germans did not want to use the artists for their own needs, such as forging documents, etc., as they did elsewhere.
I know only one case where when Germans employed the artists from the ghetto, they wanted to prepare the special exhibition, probably mocking Jews. The same we can see in the Łódź ghetto. There was a special institution where Jews some of them were converted. They were preparing a special exhibition at request or order of Germans, and I know that the same or similar exhibition was preparing in the Warsaw Ghetto, not exactly in the Warsaw Ghetto, in its part called Traffenstelle, where Germans gathered very different Jewish things, stolen or taken from Jewish rich houses. And they employed Samuel Puterman and Max Anielewicz to prepare this exhibition, but one of them, probably Anielewicz, they painted a nice picture of Jewish worker, very pathetic one. And when the German officer saw this picture, he became angry and he destroyed this picture because it was too beautiful, too pathetic, and he couldn't stand this. And that's why this exhibition was never completed. I think it was connected a little bit with some contacts made by Anielewicz during the first part of occupation. As I said, he was employed because he was known to Germans. But you should remember, because I am dealing with many artists, not only with fine artists, that Germans employed, for example, Jewish musicians. They took them from the ghetto and they played for them during parties made on the Aryan side. It's an example only, one example only.
Okay, I think you answered all the questions. Okay, so thank you all for taking part on this third event of our second series. I would like to thank you again, Dr. Agnieszka Żółkiewska, and to the Emanuel Ringelblum Jewish Historical Institute, and especially to Bartek Boris and the director Monika Krawczyk, and to Julia Mackiewicz-Saban, and to acting director Katarzyna Dzierżawska from the Polish Institute in Tel Aviv, to Gil Faran and the Association of Israeli Guides and Leaders of Delegation to Poland and Commemoration of the Holocaust, and to Moreshet, Mordechai Anielewicz Memorial Education and Research Center. Thank you all. Have a great evening and keep safe.
Thanks a lot. Asheinem Dank, and have a nice evening.
Goodbye.
Good luck. Bye.